Some girls dream of a prince sweeping them off their feet. Me? I was bought by a king, but his crown was forged of blood, and his castle rested on secrets potent enough to obliterate us both. The rain was a relentless battering ram against the cheap, cracked windows of our third-floor walk-up, sounding like angry fists demanding to be let in. Every stray droplet that found its way through the loose window frame splattered on the mismatched, worn furniture below, creating a dreary rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my weary life. I practically flew up the narrow, creaking stairs, taking 2 at a time, my backpack feeling like it weighed a ton, stuffed as it was with heavy architecture textbooks and the accumulated exhaustion of another 16-hour day. At 22, I felt like I was aging in dog years. While the other kids my age were out partying and navigating the dating scene, I was juggling a killer course load with endless shifts at Café Luna, just trying to keep our heads above water. The rent was 3 weeks past due. The unopened electricity bill was mocking me from its perch on the kitchen counter, and my father's promises were about as reliable as his sobriety, which is to say, not at all. "Dad," I called out, pushing open the door to our cramped apartment. The all-too-familiar smell hit me like a punch to the gut, stale beer mingling with the bitter aroma of defeat and shattered dreams. "Please, just tell me you actually went to that construction interview today." Marcus Martinez was slumped over our beat-up, second-hand dining table, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey, his only companion in the world. At 55, he looked closer to 70. His once dark, thick hair was now streaked with premature gray, and his once strong, capable hands were trembling noticeably as he lifted the glass to his lips. "Isabella Mija," he mumbled, not even bothering to look up at me. "You're home early." "It's past 11, Dad. I worked a double shift after classes, remember?" I dropped my heavy bag with a thud and took in the depressing sight of what was supposed to be our home. Empty beer bottles lined the windowsill like grim trophies of failure, each one a testament to his spiraling decline. "The Hendersons called about the rent again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Henderson was practically crying when she told me they might actually have to evict us. My father let out a bitter, hollow laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. Eviction. Such a polite way of saying they're going to throw us out on the street. "Then do something about it." The words burst out of me before I could even think. Raw and desperate. Apply for some jobs. Show up to interviews sober for once. Stop drinking away what little money we even have left. For the first time that evening, he actually looked at me, really saw me. His brown eyes, so much like my own, were bloodshot and swimming with something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "You think it's that simple, Isabella? You think I haven't tried? Have you? Because from where I'm standing, it really looks like you've just given up completely." I moved into the kitchen, or the closest thing we had to one, and started clearing away the mess he'd left in his wake. Dirty dishes piled high, overflowing ashtrays, the general detritus of a man who had stopped caring about anything except getting to the bottom of the next bottle. "I used to build things," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Beautiful things. Skyscrapers, bridges, monuments that were supposed to last forever." I'd heard this speech countless times before. Tales of the glory days when Marcus Martinez was a respected foreman, when my mother was still alive, when we lived in an actual house instead of this cramped, depressing apartment that reeked of other people's dreams come to die. That was before Mom died, Dad. That was 12 years ago. At some point, you have to move forward. Some things you just can't move forward from, Mija. Some debts just follow you forever. The way he said it made me pause, a dirty plate halfway to the sink. "What debts, Dad? What are you even talking about?" But he'd already turned back to his bottle, retreating into the alcohol-fueled haze that had become his preferred version of reality. I finished cleaning in silence, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't even want to consider. My father had always been overly dramatic when he was drunk, prone to making cryptic statements that never meant anything in the harsh light of the morning. At precisely 11:23 p.m., someone started pounding on our front door. Not knocking, pounding with a brutal authority that suggested the person on the other side didn't give a damn whether they woke up the entire building or not. The sound reverberated through our paper-thin walls like a series of gunshots, each impact making our cheap, rickety furniture rattle. My father went completely rigid, the color draining from his face so quickly that I thought he might actually faint. The glass slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the worn linoleum floor and sending shards of glass and whiskey flying in every direction. "Dad, don't answer it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the continued assault on our door. "Isabella, whatever happens, don't open that door." But it was already too late. The pounding stopped abruptly, replaced by the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal. Someone was picking our cheap, flimsy lock with ruthless professional efficiency. The door swung inward to reveal three men in expensive, impeccably tailored suits, water dripping from their broad shoulders despite the relative shelter of the covered hallway. They moved with the silent, predatory grace of sharks sensing blood in the water, their eyes coldly scanning our pathetic apartment with barely disguised contempt. The first man through the door was built like a refrigerator, all muscle and menace, with hands that looked perfectly capable of crushing bones, and a face that suggested he'd done exactly that on more than one occasion. The second was leaner, but no less dangerous, with the kind of deep, crisscrossing scars that spoke of violence survived rather than avoided. But it was the third man who stole my breath and simultaneously froze my blood solid. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 28 or 30, with the kind of devastating, classic good looks that belonged on the cover of a magazine, not in my shabby living room. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble by one of the Renaissance masters. His suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and he wore it with the effortless, casual confidence of someone who had never known want or need in his entire life. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. Pale blue, almost colorless, they held the kind of chilling, calculating intelligence that missed absolutely nothing and forgave even less. When those eyes settled on me, I felt like prey being silently evaluated by an apex predator. "Marcus Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the faint, almost imperceptible trace of an accent I couldn't quite place, or Italian, maybe, wrapped around words that were imbued with absolute, unquestionable authority. "You've been avoiding my calls." My father struggled to his feet, swaying precariously, trying to appear far more composed than he clearly felt. "Mr. Gambino, I wasn't expecting you to come personally. When a man owes me $2 million and then conveniently disappears, I take a personal interest in the matter. $2 million. The sheer, impossible number hit me like a physical blow, so ludicrously large and incomprehensible that my mind initially just rejected it entirely. My father, who could barely scrape together enough money for the rent, somehow owed this terrifying, dangerous stranger more money than most people saw in their entire lifetime. "I can explain," my father started, his voice trembling, but the man, Gambino, held up a single, perfectly manicured finger, silencing him instantly. "Your explanations have been noticeably absent for the past 6 months, Marcus, as have your payments." Those pale eyes shifted to me again, and I felt my skin prickle with an involuntary wave of awareness. "Your daughter. She wasn't mentioned in our original contract." "Leave her out of this," my father said, finally finding some backbone despite his obvious, overwhelming terror. "Isabella has absolutely nothing to do with my business. Your business became my business the very moment you defaulted on our agreement." Gambino took a step closer to me, and I caught a subtle, almost intoxicating scent of expensive cologne mingled with something darker, something dangerous. "Isabella Martinez, 22 years old, architecture student at Metropolitan University, works part-time at Cafe Luna on 5th Street. The fact that he knew so much about me, about my life, made my mouth go instantly dry with fear. "How do you know all that?" "I make it my business to know everything about the people who owe me money, Miss Martinez, and their families." His gaze swept over our pathetic living room, taking in the broken-down furniture, the water stains on the ceiling, the general air of desperation and decay that clung to everything like a persistent, suffocating smoke. "Though I must say, seeing your living conditions, it's quite clear that your father's debt is unlikely to be resolved through conventional means." "What kind of debt?" I finally managed to ask, my voice coming out far smaller and weaker than I had intended. How does someone even owe $2 million? My father made a strangled sound of protest, but Gambino's chilling smile silenced him instantly. Gambling debts, Miss Martinez. Your father has an unfortunately expensive habit of betting on outcomes he cannot control. Football games, boxing matches, horse races. For the past 3 years, he's been borrowing money to cover his losses, always promising himself that the next big bet would be the one to make everything right. The room tilted precariously around me. 3 years. For 3 years, while I had been working myself to the bone, sacrificing everything, just trying to keep us afloat, my father had been systematically destroying any chance we had at a normal life. I can get the money? I heard myself say, the words spilling out of my mouth almost involuntarily, even though I had absolutely no idea how. Give me some time. I'll figure something out. $2 million, Miss Martinez? At your current income rate, you'd need approximately 47 years to earn that much. Assuming, of course, that you never spend a single penny on trivial things like food or shelter. Then what do you want? The question came out as barely a whisper, a desperate plea lost in the overwhelming weight of the moment. Gambino studied me for a long, unnerving moment, and I had the distinct, unsettling feeling that he was seeing something I didn't understand, something that had absolutely nothing to do with money or debt or the desperate, crushing mathematics of poverty. Your father has 3 days to present me with $2 million, Miss Martinez. If he cannot produce the money, then I'll be forced to collect payment in other ways. His pale eyes never left mine, and the thinly veiled threat in his voice was unmistakable. And I assure you, the alternatives are far less pleasant for everyone involved. He turned to leave, his 2 men falling into formation around him like a well-rehearsed, almost unsettling dance. But at the door, he paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression that I couldn't quite decipher. An expression that sent another shiver of apprehension down my spine. 3 days, Marcus. Don't make me come looking for you again. The door closed softly behind them with a quiet click that somehow carried even more menace than if they had slammed it hard enough to shake the entire building. I stood frozen in the center of our ruined living room, just trying to process everything that had just happened. $2 million, 3 days, and a man with pale, soulless eyes who looked at me like I was the answer to some question I didn't even understand. The call came at exactly 10 a.m., 36 hours after Alessandro Gambino had walked out of our apartment and taken any last vestiges of my sense of security with him. I was sitting in advanced structural design, desperately trying to focus on Professor Williams's lecture about load-bearing calculations, when my phone vibrated insistently against the surface of my desk. Unknown number. My stomach clenched with a sudden, sickening wave of dread. Miss Martinez. That all-too-familiar voice flowed smoothly through the phone like expensive whiskey being poured slowly over ice. I trust you've had ample time to consider our conversation. Around me, students scribbled notes and sketched diagrams, blissfully unaware that my entire world was collapsing around me in real time. I quietly slipped out of the classroom and into the deserted hallway, pressing my back against the cold, unforgiving concrete wall. My father doesn't have $2 million, I whispered, stating the obvious, stating the impossible. You know he doesn't have it. I know many things about your father, Isabella. May I call you Isabella? He didn't even wait for permission, just proceeded as if he were entitled to know everything about me. I know that he lost his construction job due to a gambling incident involving his foreman's wages. I know that he's defaulted on 17 different loans in the past 2 years. I know that your mother's life insurance was the only thing that kept you from being homeless when you were 17. Each cold, calculated revelation hit me like a physical blow, stealing what little breath I had left. How could this complete stranger possibly know more about my family's history, about the most painful and intimate details of our lives, than I did? What I'm particularly curious about, he continued, his voice taking on a subtly different tone, is you, a young woman sacrificing her entire youth to support a father who has repeatedly betrayed her trust. Most people would have simply walked away by now. He's my father, and loyalty is admirable. It's also something I value very highly in my business relationships. A short pause, A pause that stretched out just long enough to make me extremely nervous, to make me feel like I was standing on the very edge of a precipice. I'd like to discuss alternative arrangements. Are you available this afternoon? I have classes, Mr. Gambino. Your father owes me $2 million. In 24 hours, if that debt remains unpaid, alternative collection methods will be implemented. I strongly suggest you reevaluate your priorities. The line went dead, leaving me staring blankly at my phone in the middle of a busy hallway while oblivious students floated around me like water flowing around a stationary stone. 24 hours. The 3 days he had originally given us had somehow been reduced to just one. I skipped my remaining classes and took the bus to the address he'd texted me, silently watching the city transform outside the window as we slowly moved away from my rundown neighborhood and toward the obscenely wealthy suburbs. The houses grew progressively larger, the lawns more impeccably manicured, the cars more ridiculously expensive. By the time I finally reached my stop, I felt like an alien who had just landed on a completely foreign planet. The sprawling mansion that rose up before me looked like something out of an architectural magazine, something that couldn't possibly be real. Clean, modern lines of glass and stone created a structure that seemed to flow seamlessly into the carefully landscaped grounds surrounding it. Water features and strategically placed lighting turned the entire approach into something more closely resembling a work of art. 2 men in dark, severe suits flanked the imposing front entrance, their bulging jackets suggesting that they were definitely armed. They nodded respectfully as I approached, as if young women in discount store clothing regularly visited this heavily guarded fortress of wealth and power. "Miss Martinez," one of them said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Gambino is expecting you." The interior was even more breathtaking, even more extravagant than the exterior. The grand foyer alone could have comfortably housed my entire cramped apartment, with marble floors that gleamed like polished mirrors and a staircase that curved gracefully upward in an elegant, sweeping spiral. Original, priceless artwork adorned the walls, pieces that I recognized from my textbooks but had never even dreamed of seeing in someone's actual home. "Impressive, isn't it?" Alessandro appeared seemingly out of nowhere from a side corridor, moving with the fluid, almost cat-like grace of someone who was completely, utterly at home in this world of extravagant luxury. My grandmother insisted on Italian marble throughout the main floor. She said anything less would be an unbearable insult to our family heritage. He looked different in the daylight, younger somehow, but no less dangerous, no less intimidating. The perfectly tailored suit emphasized his athletic build, and I caught myself noticing details that I definitely shouldn't have been noticing. The way his dark hair caught the light, the small, almost imperceptible scar just above his left eyebrow that hinted at a violent, complicated past. "Isabella Martinez," he said, almost experimentally, as if he was just testing the way my name felt in his mouth. 22 years old, graduated valedictorian from Lincoln High despite working 30 hours a week to help support your family. Full scholarship to Metropolitan University, based on a design portfolio that your professors have described as nothing short of extraordinary for someone your age. "How do you know all this?" Alessandro gestured for me to follow him through a series of long corridors lined with even more priceless art, each piece more stunning than the last. "Knowledge is power, Isabella. The more I understand about the people in my life, the better I can serve their needs or anticipate their actions." He led me into a sprawling study that looked like something lifted directly from a European castle. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled with exquisitely bound, leather-covered volumes that appeared to be rare first editions, and a massive, imposing desk dominated the very center of the room. Behind it, enormous windows offered a sweeping view of meticulously manicured gardens that stretched out toward the distant horizon. "Please sit down." Alessandro settled into the large, comfortable chair behind the desk while I perched nervously on the very edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee, wine, water?" "I'm fine," I said, the lie coming completely automatically. I definitely wasn't fine. I was terrified, completely overwhelmed, and desperately out of place in this ostentatious monument to unimaginable wealth. "Very well. Let's discuss your father's situation. Alessandro opened a sleek file folder and carefully withdrew several photographs, spreading them out across the expansive desk where I couldn't possibly avoid seeing them. The photographs had clearly been taken at various locations throughout the city. As you can see, your father's gambling extends far beyond simple sports betting. The grainy images showed my father at shady underground poker games, illegal back-alley casinos, and exclusive private clubs that I didn't even recognize. In each and every photo, he looked increasingly desperate, increasingly broken, increasingly lost. 3 years ago, Marcus Martinez was a functioning alcoholic with a relatively minor gambling problem. Today, he's a severe addict who will literally bet on anything. Dice games, card games, which raindrop will reach the bottom of a window first. Alessandro's voice held no judgment, no condemnation, just cold, detached, clinical assessment. Men like your father are actually quite valuable to people like me, Isabella. They're predictable, easily manageable, and they always, inevitably, come back for more. Then why haven't you cut him off? Why keep lending him money? Because 3 months ago, he offered me something even more valuable than money. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, those unnerving pale eyes carefully studying my reaction. He offered me his daughter. The words hit me like a blast of ice water to the face, stealing the air from my lungs. What? Oh, not in so many words, of course. But when a man runs out of money, runs out of possessions, runs out of hope, he inevitably starts making promises that he simply has absolutely no right to make. Alessandro stood up and moved slowly to the window, clasping his hands behind his back as he gazed out at the sprawling gardens. Your father very subtly suggested that you might be willing to work off his debt in a more personal capacity. Bile rose in my throat, choking me. My father would never, would he? Alessandro turned back to me, his expression completely unreadable, impossible to decipher. A desperate man will sacrifice absolutely anything to feed his addiction. Isabella, family, dignity, his own daughter's future. The only real question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to save him? I don't understand what you're even asking me. I'm asking you to marry me. The unexpected words hung heavy in the air between us like a razor-sharp blade suspended by a single, fragile thread. I just stared at him, completely stunned, absolutely certain that I had somehow misheard. Excuse me, a business arrangement? Alessandro clarified, as if he were simply discussing the weather, as if this were the most normal, logical thing in the world. You become my wife, and your father's debt simply disappears. You continue your education, of course. I'll even arrange for you to transfer to a better program if you prefer. You'll want for absolutely nothing materially, and in exchange you belong to me completely. His pale, intense eyes held mine with unwavering focus and unnerving intensity. You take my name, live in my house, appear at my side whenever required. You provide legitimate heirs to continue the Gambino legacy. You're talking about buying me. I'm talking about saving your life. Alessandro moved even closer, and I caught another intoxicating whiff of his expensive cologne. Something subtly complex, intensely masculine, that made my pulse quicken against my will, despite my overwhelming fear. Your father's debt extends far beyond my organization, Isabella. He owes money to people far less reasonable than I am. People who would use you in ways that would break you completely before discarding what's left. A man suddenly appeared silently in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered with subtly graying temples and the kind of weathered, scarred face that spoke of a life of violence survived. Boss, the Romano meeting is in 15 minutes. Cancel it, Marco. Alessandro didn't even take his eyes off me. Miss Martinez and I are still negotiating. Marco Torino, I suddenly realized Alessandro's right-hand man, the one who had been mentioned in hushed, respectful conversations at the cafe whenever customers discussed the infamous Gambino family. He looked at me with a moment of curious, almost clinical assessment before nodding silently and disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Marco's been with me for 8 years, Alessandro explained, his voice devoid of any emotion. Ever since I took over the family business. He's completely loyal, completely trustworthy. These are the kinds of people you'd be surrounded by, Isabella. Protection, security, stability. Something flickered briefly across his face. Pain? Maybe, or even regret. I inherited the business when my father was killed. Some inheritances come with trust funds and summer homes. Mine came with enemies and blood debts. He returned to his desk and withdrew yet another file. The documents he showed me were dizzying arrays of financial records, bank accounts, investment portfolios, and business holdings that stretched across multiple states and countries. The numbers were simply staggering, incomprehensible. The Gambino family controls legitimate businesses worth well over $500 million. Construction companies, restaurants, real estate development, import-export operations. Alessandro's finger traced across complex spreadsheets that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics for all I understood them. We employ over 3,000 people directly, and our activities support countless more, all legal for the vast majority. Some activities exist in gray areas that allow for a more flexible interpretation of the regulations, but absolutely nothing that would in any way endanger the long-term stability of the organization. I just stared numbly at the documents, trying desperately to wrap my mind around the sheer scale of what he was showing me, of the power and wealth that he commanded. Why would you even want to marry someone like me? You could have anyone. I could have anyone willing to marry me for my money. That's not quite the same thing. Alessandro closed the file with a quiet snap and leaned forward, his intense, unnerving gaze holding mine captive. I've been watching you for months, Isabella. The way you care for your father despite his constant failures. The way you've sacrificed your own happiness and your own dreams to keep your family together. That kind of loyalty, that strength of character, it simply cannot be bought. You've been watching me? I make it my business to fully understand everyone connected to my interests. Your father became my concern the moment he started borrowing money from my associates. Alessandro's smile was sharp, cold, and humorless. But you became my concern for entirely different reasons. This is insane. This is business. I need a wife who will provide legitimate heirs and represent the family with the appropriate level of dignity. You need security and the kind of protection that will keep both you and your father alive. He stood up and moved slowly around the massive desk, stopping just close enough to make me intensely aware of his overwhelming presence, of the barely restrained power that seemed to emanate from him like a palpable force. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. And if I refuse? Alessandro's expression didn't change in the slightest, but something cold and dangerous flickered briefly in his pale, soulless eyes. Your father dies, painfully and publicly, as an example to others who might consider defaulting on their obligations. And you'll be left to deal with his remaining creditors, who are considerably less civilized than I am. That's not a choice. That's coercion. Welcome to my world, Isabella. Alessandro returned to his large chair behind the desk, suddenly looking every one of his 28 years and then some, the weight of his world seemingly settling heavily on his broad shoulders. Choice is a luxury that most people simply can't afford. The real question is, will you make the smart choice? Or will you let your pride completely destroy everything that you've worked so hard to protect? I stared at this dangerous, beautiful man who was calmly and rationally discussing purchasing my life as if it were just another routine business transaction. Everything I had ever planned, everything I had ever dreamed of, was crumbling to dust around me. I need some time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, alternative collection methods will be implemented, and the offer expires. Alessandro's voice was gentle, almost deceptively so, but his tone was implacable, unyielding. Consider your decision very carefully, Isabella. Some opportunities only come around once. I spent the entire night staring blankly at the ceiling, Alessandro's proposition echoing endlessly in my mind like a broken record, a song I couldn't possibly stop hearing. Marry him, become his wife. Sign away my freedom completely to save my father's worthless life. By dawn, I had somehow managed to convince myself that there simply had to be another way. The First National Bank opened promptly at 9 a.m., and I was waiting anxiously outside when the security guard finally unlocked the heavy glass doors. My appointment with a loan officer had been scheduled for weeks, a desperate attempt to secure a student loan consolidation that might possibly free up just enough money to help cover the overdue rent. Now, I had far bigger, far more terrifying problems. Miss Martinez? The loan officer, a pleasant, middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a practical, sensible suit, gestured me into her small, brightly lit office. I've reviewed your application, and I'm afraid I have some rather disappointing news. I sank into the uncomfortable chair across from her large desk, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. What kind of disappointing news? With your current income and your existing debt-to-income ratio, we simply can't approve you for any additional lending at this time. In fact, your existing student loans are actually showing some rather concerning payment irregularities. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. What do you mean? According to our records, you've missed 3 payments in the past 6 months. Your account has been marked as delinquent, which unfortunately affects your overall creditworthiness for any future lending opportunities. 3 missed payments. My father must have been intercepting the bills, probably pawning them or using the money for his relentless gambling. I felt the all-too-familiar burn of betrayal rising up inside me, mixed with a potent cocktail of helpless rage and crushing despair. Is there anything else I can possibly do? Any other options at all? The woman's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Miss Martinez. Perhaps a family member could co-sign? Or if you had collateral to secure the loan. I walked out of the bank feeling more defeated than when I'd entered. No loan, no money, no options except the one Alessandro had offered. The city seemed different as I made my way back toward campus, brighter, more threatening, full of people who belonged in ways I never would. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Cafe Milano, 2 p.m. We need to discuss terms. I should have ignored it. Should have gone to classes, pretended my world wasn't falling apart, maintained the illusion that I had choices. Instead, I found myself walking toward the address Alessandro had sent, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Cafe Milano occupied a corner building in the financial district, the kind of place where powerful people made deals over espresso that cost more than I spent on food in a week. Through the windows, I could see businessmen in expensive suits conducting meetings that probably involved more money than my family would see in a lifetime. Alessandro sat at a corner table, looking perfectly at ease in surroundings that intimidated me just by existing. He wore a charcoal gray suit today with a white shirt that emphasized his olive complexion, and a tie that probably cost more than my rent. When he saw me approach, he stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd been taught proper manners since childhood. Isabella, thank you for coming. He pulled out a chair for me, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt surreal given our circumstances. I took the liberty of ordering for you, cappuccino, no sugar, and a croissant. I hope that's acceptable. The fact that he knew my coffee preferences sent a chill down my spine. How do you know how I drink my coffee? I told you yesterday. I make it my business to understand the people in my life. Alessandro returned to his seat, those pale blue eyes studying my face with unnerving intensity. You look tired. Did you sleep poorly? I spent the night trying to figure out if there's any way out of this situation that doesn't involve selling myself to a stranger. And what did you conclude? I stared at the perfect cappuccino he'd ordered for me, the foam art creating a delicate pattern on the surface. That you've made sure there aren't any alternatives. I've simply presented you with the reality of your circumstances. Alessandro's voice was gentle, but implacable. Your father's debt exists whether I'm involved or not. The consequences of his choices will unfold regardless of my preferences. You could forgive the debt. I could, but that would set a precedent that would undermine my authority and endanger everyone under my protection. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. I don't run a charity, Isabella. I run a business that employs thousands of people and supports countless families. Showing weakness invites challenges that result in violence. So, this is about maintaining your reputation. This is about survival. Mine, yours, and everyone connected to both of us. Alessandro reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, setting it on the table between us. But it's also about opportunity. I stared at the box without touching it. What's that? Open it. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid to reveal a ring that took my breath away. The center stone was a perfect diamond, at least 3 carats, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the cafe table. It was the kind of ring that appeared in magazine advertisements, the kind normal people only dreamed about. "It belonged to my grandmother," Alessandro said quietly. "She wore it for 57 years, through wars and peace, poverty and prosperity. She gave it to my father the day before she died with instructions that it should only be given to a woman worthy of the Gambino name. I'm not worthy of anything. I'm just a broke college student whose father is a gambling addict. You're a woman who sacrificed her own happiness to care for a parent who's repeatedly betrayed your trust. You've maintained your integrity despite having every reason to become bitter and selfish." Alessandro's hand moved across the table, his fingers almost touching mine. "That kind of strength is rarer than diamonds. Isabella, you don't know me. I know that you work double shifts to pay for your father's mistakes. I know that you've never missed a day of classes despite being exhausted and overwhelmed. I know that you volunteer at the literacy center downtown, teaching adults to read, even though you barely have time to eat." His pale eyes held mine with unsettling intensity. "I know that you cry in the bathroom at Café Luna when you think no one is watching. But you always wipe your tears and go back to work with a smile." The accuracy of his observations made my skin crawl. "You've been stalking me. I've been protecting you. There's a difference." Alessandro withdrew his hand, returning to the careful distance he maintained. "Marco has been ensuring your safety for the past 3 months. The reason you haven't been approached by your father's other creditors is because word has spread that you're under Gambino protection. Without my knowledge or consent, would you have preferred I let them take their chances with you? Because I can arrange that if you'd like to experience the alternatives." I thought about the men who'd visited our apartment, the cold violence in their eyes when they'd looked at me. Alessandro might be dangerous, but he'd never looked at me like I was prey to be consumed. Why marriage? Why not just hire me or something? Because marriage creates bonds that can't be easily broken. It provides legitimacy, legal protection, social standing. Alessandro's voice took on a harder edge. "And because I need heirs, Isabella. The Gambino name dies with me unless I have children to carry it forward." "Children?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Eventually, yes. When you're ready, when you're comfortable with the arrangement." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not a monster, Isabella. I don't force myself on unwilling women. But you'll coerce them into marriage. I'll offer them choices they wouldn't have otherwise." Alessandro gestured around the cafe at the luxury surrounding us. "Look around you. This could be your life. Security, comfort, respect. No more working double shifts. No more worrying about rent. No more watching your father destroy himself with his addiction." A waiter appeared at our table, refilling our coffee cups with practiced efficiency. He moved with the kind of deference that suggested he knew exactly who Alessandro was, and what that meant for his tip. "The croissant is excellent," Alessandro observed, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the terms of my captivity. "French butter imported daily. The chef here trained in Paris." "I'm not hungry. You should eat anyway. You've lost weight since I first saw you, and you were already too thin." His gaze swept over me with clinical assessment. "Proper nutrition will be a priority once you're living under my roof. You're talking about me like I'm a possession you're planning to maintain, aren't you?" The question was asked without malice, just matter-of-fact acknowledgement. "Your father has already sold you, Isabella. The only question now is whether you'll accept the terms I'm offering, or whether you'll take your chances with less civilized buyers." I stared at this beautiful, dangerous man who was calmly discussing the purchase of my life over artisanal coffee and French pastries. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored suit to the way the staff treated him with nervous respect. What would be expected of me? Publicly, you'd be my wife. You'd attend social functions, meet with other wives in our circle, represent the family with dignity. Alessandro's fingers drummed against the table, the only sign of tension he displayed. Privately, you'd live in my house, take my name, and eventually provide heirs to continue the Gambino legacy. And if I say no? His pale eyes met mine with unwavering directness. Then you walk out of here, and I'll never contact you again. Your father's debt will be collected through traditional means, and you'll be free to rebuild your life however you choose. After watching my father die, after watching your father face the consequences of his own choices, Alessandro leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I won't lie to you, Isabella. The men your father owes money to aren't known for their restraint or creativity. His death would be public, painful, and educational. And me? You'd be left to deal with his remaining creditors, who would view you as a valuable asset to be liquidated. Alessandro's voice remained calm, almost gentle, as he described horrors I couldn't fully comprehend. Some debts are inherited, Isabella. Your father's gambling has created obligations that will outlive him unless they're satisfied. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the images his words conjured. When I opened them, Alessandro was still watching me with that unsettling intensity. I need more time. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford. Alessandro signaled for the check, and the waiter appeared instantly with the bill. I've made arrangements for you to see what your life could become. Marco will pick you up at 7 tonight. I haven't agreed to anything. No, you haven't. Alessandro stood and moved around the table, stopping beside my chair. His hand settled on my shoulder, warm and heavy and possessive. But we both know you will. His touch sent an unexpected jolt of electricity through me, and I caught his scent again, that intoxicating mixture of expensive cologne and barely leashed power. When I looked up at him, something flickered in his pale eyes that I couldn't identify. Until tonight, Isabella. He left me sitting alone at the cafe table, the velvet ring box still open between my hands, and the weight of an impossible decision crushing down on me like a physical force. 2 weeks had passed since Alessandro's proposal. 2 weeks of carefully orchestrated encounters that felt like a strange courtship dance. He appeared at my university, waiting by my car with coffee and pastries from expensive cafes. He sent flowers to the coffee shop where I worked, always with handwritten notes that struck the perfect balance between romantic and respectful. He had dinner delivered to our apartment when he knew I'd be too exhausted to cook. Each interaction was calculated to show me what my life could become. And despite my resistance, I found myself looking forward to seeing him. There was something magnetic about Alessandro Gambino that went beyond his obvious wealth and power. When he looked at me, I felt like the only person in the world who mattered. But I hadn't given him an answer yet. You're being ridiculous, Isabella? I muttered to myself as I packed my backpack for another long day of classes and work. He's a criminal, a dangerous man who's basically trying to buy you. The logical part of my brain knew this was true. But the part that was tired of being afraid, tired of struggling, tired of watching my father destroy everything we touched, that part whispered that maybe Alessandro's offer wasn't as terrible as it seemed. I was walking across campus toward the library when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I'd learned to recognize the particular ringtone that accompanied Alessandro's calls. Good morning, Isabella. It's barely 8 a.m. Alessandro, don't you sleep? Not much. His voice held a note of something I couldn't identify, weariness, maybe, or stress. I need to see you. Something's happened. The urgency in his tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. What kind of something? Not over the phone. Marco is already on his way to pick you up. I have classes. Cancel them. The command was soft but implacable. This is about your safety, Isabella. Don't argue with me. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the middle of the quad, while students flowed around me like water around a stone. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to rattle Alessandro's usual calm composure. Marco's black SUV pulled up to the curb within minutes, and I climbed into the passenger seat with a growing sense of dread. The man who'd been Alessandro's right hand for years looked tense, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. What's going on, Marco? Boss will explain, but we need to get you somewhere safe first. His voice was gruff, colored by an accent I couldn't place. We drove in silence through the city, taking a route I didn't recognize toward an industrial area I'd never seen before. Warehouses and abandoned factories lined the streets, their broken windows like dead eyes staring out at a world that had moved on without them. Marco pulled up to a nondescript building that looked like every other warehouse in the district. But I noticed the subtle signs of security, cameras hidden in strategic positions, men who tried to look casual while obviously watching our approach. Alessandro met us at the entrance, his usual impeccable appearance marred by tension lines around his eyes and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater instead of his customary suit, and I realized with a start that this was the first time I'd seen him dressed casually. Isabella. He pulled me into his arms before I could protest, holding me against his chest with desperate intensity. Thank God you're safe. The embrace lasted only seconds, but I felt the tremor in his hands, the rapid beat of his heart against my cheek. Whatever had happened, it had genuinely frightened him. What's wrong? You're scaring me. I pulled back to look at his face, seeing fear beneath the carefully controlled exterior. Your apartment was attacked this morning. Men with guns broke down the door, ransacked everything, took your father. Alessandro's pale eyes were hard as winter ice. If you'd been there. The world tilted around me. My father? Is he alive? For now. They left this. Alessandro handed me a Polaroid photograph that showed my father tied to a chair, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with terror. On the back, someone had written, "The girl for the old man, 24 hours. My knees gave out, but Alessandro caught me before I could fall, his strong arms supporting my weight as shock crashed over me in waves. Who did this? The Bratva, Russian organized crime. Alessandro guided me to a chair, his hands gentle but firm. They've been moving into our territory for months, testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before we push back. But why my father? Why me? Alessandro knelt in front of my chair, his hands covering mine. Because they know you matter to me. Because taking you would hurt me more than any business loss ever could. The admission hung between us like a confession. In 2 weeks, I'd gone from stranger to weapon, from irrelevant college student to valuable target. The thought was terrifying and oddly thrilling at the same time. I should call the police. The police can't help with this. Alessandro's voice was gentle but implacable. This is my world, Isabella, with its own rules and its own justice. If you want your father back alive, you have to trust me. Trust you? I barely know you. You know that I've kept you safe for months without you even realizing it. You know that I've treated you with more respect than most men would show their wives, let alone a woman they're trying to convince. Alessandro stood, moving to the window that looked out over the warehouse district. You know that I'm the only person in this city with the resources to get your father back. He was right, and we both knew it. Whatever my feelings about Alessandro and his proposition, he was my only hope of saving what was left of my family. What do they want? You, in exchange for your father's life. Alessandro turned back to me, his expression carved from stone. They think you're my weakness, Isabella. They're not wrong. The vulnerability in his admission made something flutter in my chest. This powerful, dangerous man who commanded respect and fear from everyone around him was admitting that I had the power to hurt him. If I go to them, you're not going anywhere near them. The command cracked through the air like a whip. I won't trade one life for another, especially not yours for his. He's my father. And you're. Alessandro stopped, seeming to struggle with words. You're mine to protect. The possessive statement should have angered me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my veins in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. So what do? We get him back on our terms, with our methods. Alessandro moved closer, his pale eyes holding mine with magnetic intensity. But Isabella, after today, everything changes. Once the Bratva has marked you as a target, you can never go back to your old life. What do you mean? I mean that, as of this moment, you're under my protection permanently. Whether you marry me or not, whether you want it or not, you belong to me now. His hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness. The moment they decided to use you as leverage, they made you a part of this world. I should have protested, should have demanded alternatives, should have insisted on my right to choose. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawing comfort from his strength. I'm scared. Good. Fear will keep you alive. Alessandro's thumb traced across my cheekbone, and I caught the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, adrenaline, maybe, or the promise of violence. But I need you to be brave too, Isabella. I need you to trust me completely. How? By accepting that your old life is over and embracing what comes next. Alessandro leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. By saying yes to my proposal and becoming my wife in truth, not just in name. Now, with my father missing and people trying to kill us, especially now, Alessandro pulled back to meet my eyes, his expression intense with desire and determination. Because after tonight, there won't be any going back for either of us. Before I could respond, Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Boss, we've got movement. 3 vehicles just pulled up outside the Martinez apartment. Looks like they're setting up surveillance. Alessandro's hand tightened on my face, his pale eyes blazing with cold fire. They're watching for her to come home. He turned to Marco. How long until we're ready? 2 hours? Maybe 3. The men are in position, but Dimitri's holed up in that old textile factory with at least 20 guards. Then we move at midnight. Alessandro looked back at me, his expression softening slightly. Isabella, I need you to stay here where it's safe. Marco will watch over you while I get your father back. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. He's my father, my responsibility. I stood, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I won't sit here hiding while other people risk their lives for my family. Alessandro studied my face for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when his perception of me shifted. No longer the fragile college student he was protecting, but someone capable of standing beside him in darkness. If you come with me tonight, there's no going back. You'll see things, do things, become someone you never imagined you could be. His pale eyes held mine with unwavering intensity. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my father, probably terrified and alone in some abandoned building. I thought about the life I'd been living, always afraid, always struggling, always at the mercy of other people's choices. And I thought about Alessandro, dangerous and magnetic, offering me a chance to stop being a victim. Yes, Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as beautiful. Then let's go to war, Isabella Martinez. He pulled me against him, his mouth capturing mine in a kiss that tasted of desperation and promise and the metallic tang of violence to come. When we broke apart, both of us breathing hard, something fundamental had shifted between us. I was no longer the innocent girl he was trying to protect. I was his partner in the darkness that lay ahead. 8 weeks had passed since Alessandro and I rescued my father from the Bratva. 8 weeks of living in his fortress-like mansion, of sharing meals and conversations that felt dangerously close to normal. 8 weeks of pretending I didn't notice how his touch lingered when he helped me into cars, or how his pale eyes followed me through rooms like I was something precious he couldn't bear to lose. 8 weeks of falling for a man I wasn't sure I could trust. My father had recovered from his ordeal, though the fear never fully left his eyes. Alessandro had arranged for him to stay in a secure facility, ostensibly for addiction treatment but really for his own protection. The official story was rehabilitation. The reality was witness protection from people who still wanted him dead. But this morning, everything changed. I woke feeling nauseous, a wave of sickness that sent me stumbling to the marble bathroom Alessandro had renovated specifically for my use. As I knelt on the cold floor, retching into the pristine toilet, a terrible possibility occurred to me. When was my last period? The thought hit me like ice water. With everything that had happened, the threats, the rescue, the complete upheaval of my life, I'd stopped keeping track of normal things like menstrual cycles. But now, counting backwards, I realized I was almost 6 weeks late. 6 weeks, right around the time Alessandro and I had first been intimate. That night of desperate fear and comfort that had led to so much more than either of us had planned. I sat on the bathroom floor, my back against the marble wall, and tried to process the implications. Pregnant. I might be carrying Alessandro Gambino's child, the heir to a criminal empire I'd stumbled into by accident. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd wanted to marry me to provide legitimate heirs, and now I might be pregnant before we'd even had a proper wedding. I needed to know for certain. The pharmacy was a 20-minute drive from Alessandro's estate, but I'd never made the trip alone. Marco or one of the other guards always accompanied me when I left the grounds, part of the security measures Alessandro insisted were non-negotiable. But today, I couldn't face explaining why I needed a pregnancy test to one of his men. I slipped out through the kitchen entrance while Alessandro was in his office conducting business, taking the keys to the small Mercedes he'd given me for my personal use. The guards at the gate looked surprised when I approached alone, but they didn't question my right to leave. The drive into town felt like an escape, even though I knew it was temporary. For 20 minutes, I could pretend I was just a normal 22-year-old. I was a woman running errands, not exactly the unofficial fiancé of the city's most powerful crime boss. The pharmacy teemed with the usual afternoon hustle, and I snagged a pregnancy test from the family planning aisle, my hands betraying just a slight tremor. The teenage cashier barely gave me a second glance as she rang up my purchase, probably just chalking me up as another college student facing the music after making some questionable choices. If only things were that simple. As I drove back towards Alessandro's estate, I picked up on a black sedan tailing me. Initially, I figured it might be one of his security guys, but the car kept a calculated distance that screamed surveillance, not protection. My pulse kicked up a notch as I remembered Alessandro's constant reminders about being watched, about always being a target. I threw in a detour through downtown to see if the car would stick with me. It did, hanging back exactly 3 vehicles, all cool professionalism and patience. A shiver of dread ran down my spine as I realized I was being hunted by someone who knew how to make it look like just another day. My phone buzzed, and Alessandro's name lit up the screen. A wave of relief washed over me. "Where are you?" he barked, his voice tight with worry. "Marco said you left the estate alone. I needed to run an errand. I'm on my way back. But Alessandro, I think someone's following me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, making me even more on edge. When Alessandro finally spoke again, his voice was dangerously calm. "Describe the car." "Black sedan, 2 men in the front seat. They've been behind me for about 15 minutes. Drive to the warehouse district. Take Morrison Street to 5th, then turn left into the industrial complex. Don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't let them box you in." "What's happening?" "Just drive, Isabella. I'll explain when you're safe." I followed his instructions, my heart hammering as the sedan stayed locked on my tail. The industrial district was mostly deserted at that time of day, which made me feel more exposed, not less. As I turned into the complex Alessandro had pointed out, I instantly understood his choice. Black SUVs surged out from behind the warehouses like sharks smelling blood. Alessandro's men, armed and ready, swarmed the sedan before its occupants could even think about reacting. In my rearview mirror, I watched 2 guys in expensive suits getting yanked out of their car at gunpoint. Alessandro was at my car door before I could even put it in park, yanking it open and pulling me against his chest with a fierce possessiveness. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over me with a practiced efficiency, checking for any sign of injury. "Did they try to approach you?" "No, they just followed me." "Alessandro, who were they?" "Bratva scouts. They've been poking around our defenses for weeks, looking for weak spots." His usually pale eyes blazed with a cold fury. "You just handed them exactly what they wanted. A way to get to me through you." The accusation stung because it was true. My craving for a bit of freedom, for a touch of normal life, had created a vulnerability that could have gotten both of us killed. "I'm sorry. I just needed what was so important that you risked both our lives to get it?" Alessandro's voice was sharp, laced with anger and fear. What errand couldn't wait for proper security? I glanced down at the pregnancy test nestled in my purse. The secret that had the potential to change everything between us. and knew I couldn't tell him. Not like this. Not when he was already fuming at me for being so reckless. Personal items. Things I was too embarrassed to ask Marco to get for me. Alessandro scrutinized my face with that unnerving intensity of his, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head as he weighed whether to press me for more details. Just then, Marco appeared at his shoulder. "Boss, we've got a problem. The Russians weren't just following her. They planted a tracking device on her car." Alessandro went completely still. That still that always seemed to foreshadow violence. "How long has it been there?" "At least a week, maybe longer. Professional job, almost impossible to spot." Marco's weathered face was grim. "They know where she goes, when she leaves, how long she's away from the estate. They've been watching me for a week." The implications crashed down on me like a physical blow. "They know about my father, about the treatment facility. They know everything." Alessandro's voice was barely a whisper, but it thrummed with a promise of retribution. "Which means they've been planning something for longer than we realized." He pivoted toward Marco, his expression transforming into the cold, businesslike mask I knew all too well. "Double security at the facility where Martinez is staying. I want armed guards in his room around the clock. And get me everything we have on Bratva movements in the past month." "Already on it, boss." Marco hesitated, his eyes flicking between Alessandro and me. "But there's something else. Something you need to know about the tracking operation." "What?" "It wasn't just surveillance. Someone inside our organization had to give them access to plant that device." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We've got a leak, Alessandro. Someone close enough to know Isabella's routines. Someone with access to the motor pool." The betrayal struck Alessandro like a physical blow. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened, in the muscle that pulsed in his jaw. Someone he trusted had sold him out, had put me in the crosshairs for money, leverage, or pure fear. Who? The single word hung in the air, packed with enough menace to make grown men spill their guts. "We're still digging, but the list is short." Only 6 people had both the access and the opportunity to plant that tracker. Marco pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've already started bringing them in for questioning." Alessandro snatched the paper, his pale eyes scanning the names. When he reached the bottom of the list, his expression went completely flat. "No." The word was barely audible. "Not him. Boss. Marco Torino is on this list." The silence that followed was deafening. Marco, Alessandro's right-hand man for the past 8 years. His most trusted lieutenant. The guy who had helped rescue my father and had been there to protect me when Alessandro couldn't. "There has to be a mistake," I blurted out. But even as the words left my mouth, snippets of past events that hadn't quite clicked at the time flashed through my mind. Marco's recent jumpiness. His constant avoidance of Alessandro's gaze. The hushed phone calls he'd been taking in private. No mistake. Alessandro's voice was hollow, laced with disbelief. "The timing adds up. He's been acting off for weeks, asking questions about our security protocols, volunteering for assignments that put him close to sensitive information." "Why would Marco betray you?" Alessandro crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles bone-white. "Money, fear, leverage, it doesn't matter why." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw more pain than anger. "What matters is that the person I trusted most in the world sold us both out for 30 pieces of silver." The biblical reference wasn't lost on me. Alessandro had been betrayed by someone closer than a brother. Someone who had shared his table and his trust for nearly a decade. "What do we do now?" "Now we clean house." Alessandro yanked out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen with deadly precision. "And then we send a clear message to everyone about the price of betrayal." As he made calls to set his retaliation in motion, I stood in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, clutching a pregnancy test I hadn't had a chance to use, and realized that the man I was falling head over heels for was morphing into someone I might not even recognize. The war was closing in, and this time, it would be fought with the very people we had trusted, over secrets that had the potential to obliterate us all. But first, I needed to know if I was carrying the heir to an empire that was built on blood and betrayal. The pregnancy test sat on the cool marble of the bathroom counter, a silent accusation. 2 pink lines, as clear as day, confirming what my body had already been trying to tell me. Pregnant, 6 weeks along, with Alessandro Gambino's child. Conceived on a night when fear and comfort had blurred all the lines we had so carefully drawn. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, searching for some visible evidence of the life blooming inside me. I looked the same, tired, a little stressed, but otherwise unchanged. Yet, everything had shifted. I was no longer just Isabella Martinez, the college student who had stumbled into a criminal underworld. I was carrying the heir to an empire built on violence and raw power. Downstairs, I could hear Alessandro's voice echoing through the mansion's hallways, his tone sharp with anger as he coordinated the hunt for Marco. His most trusted lieutenant had vanished sometime during the night, taking with him 8 years' worth of secrets and knowledge of every weak point in the Gambino operation. The betrayal had cut Alessandro deeper than any physical wound. I had watched him age a decade in a matter of hours, his pale eyes hardening with a chilling fury that promised a retribution measured in blood, not just money. I needed to tell him about the pregnancy, but not now. Not while he was consumed with tracking down the man who had sold us out to our enemies. This kind of news demanded calm, privacy, and his undivided attention, none of which was available when we were basically at war. A gentle knock broke through my thoughts. Isabella. Alessandro's voice filtered through the bathroom door, softer than the tone he was using with his men. Are you all right? You've been up there for over an hour. I quickly tossed the pregnancy test into the trash and swung open the door, hoping my face didn't give away the secret I was carrying. I'm fine, just tired. Alessandro studied me with those unnerving, pale eyes, taking in details I prayed weren't as obvious as they felt. You look pale. Are you feeling sick? It's been a stressful day. Not a complete lie, although stress was the least of my current issues. He reached out, his fingers cool against my forehead. No fever, but you should rest. I've increased security around the estate. Nobody gets in or out without my personal authorization. Have you found Marco? Alessandro's expression hardened. He's gone to ground, probably with Bratva protection. But we'll find him. Betrayal like this can't go unanswered, Isabella. It sends the wrong message to everyone who depends on our strength. I watched him shift before my eyes, the man who had just touched my face with such gentle concern morphing into the ruthless leader who commanded fear and respect throughout the entire city. It was a stark reminder that no matter how tender he could be with me, Alessandro Gambino was still a dangerous man. What will happen when you find him? What always happens to traitors? Alessandro's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. Marco made his choice when he sold us out. Now he'll face the consequences. The casual way he spoke about murder should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself nodding, understanding that in this world, betrayal was a capital offense. Marco had put both our lives at risk, had endangered my father, and had sold information that could have gotten me killed. In Alessandro's world, that debt could only be settled in blood. I need to check on something at the facility where your father is staying. Alessandro continued, his hand finding mine. Will you be safe here for a few hours? Of course. Where else would I go? Something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or gratitude that I wasn't putting up a fight about the security measures. I've left instructions with the guard detail. You're not to leave the estate grounds for any reason. Understood. Alessandro leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. This will be over soon, Isabella. Once we've dealt with Marco and sent the Bratva a message they won't forget, we can go back to planning our future. Our future. If only he knew just how much more complicated that future had become. After Alessandro left, I found myself drifting aimlessly through the mansion's empty halls, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. The house that had become my sanctuary now felt more like a gilded cage, its opulence doing little to mask the violence simmering just beyond its walls. I was in Alessandro's study, leafing through the architecture books he had bought for me, when the phone rang. Not Alessandro's private line, but the main house number, the one only family and close associates knew. Gambino residence. I answered, using the formal greeting I had learned. Isabella. The voice was unfamiliar male with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Isabella Martinez? Ice flooded my veins. Who is this? A friend of Marco's. He's very concerned about your well-being. I should have hung up right then and there. Should have called security. Should have done anything but continue the conversation. But fear had somehow paralyzed my vocal cords. Marco asked me to give you a message. The voice continued, smooth and confident. He wants you to know that Alessandro isn't the man you think he is. I don't want to hear this. Your father's debt. It was never $2 million. Alessandro inflated the numbers, created a crisis that didn't actually exist so he could manipulate you into his bed. The words landed like a series of punches. Marco has the original documents, Isabella. Proof that your father owed less than $50,000. You're lying. Am I? Think about it. How convenient was it that Alessandro appeared in your life just as you were getting desperate enough to contemplate drastic measures? How perfectly timed was it that the Bratva decided to target you just when you were starting to question his motives? My legs gave out, and I sank into Alessandro's leather chair, the phone shaking in my hand. What are you saying? I'm saying that Alessandro Gambino orchestrated everything from the very beginning. The debt, the threats, even the attack on your father. All carefully designed to make you dependent on his protection. The voice was patient, almost gentle. Marco uncovered the truth and tried to warn you. That's why he had to disappear. That's impossible. Is it? When did you first realize Alessandro's men were watching you? Was it really for your protection? Or was it to make sure you didn't uncover the truth about your father's real debt? The questions hit too close to home. I thought back to the months of subtle surveillance. The way Alessandro always seemed to know exactly where I was and what I was doing. I'd assumed it was protection, but what if it had all been about control? Marco is safe, the voice went on. But he's worried about you, Isabella. He knows Alessandro will never let you go willingly. You're too valuable to him now. Valuable how? You're carrying his child. The words stopped my heart. How do you know that? Marco pays attention to details. He's been watching you for weeks. Noticing the signs Alessandro has been too distracted to see. The voice softened, tinged with something that sounded like sympathy. That baby makes you incredibly powerful, Isabella. The heir to the Gambino Empire has tremendous value to Alessandro's enemies. What do you want? To offer you a choice. Real freedom, not the gilded cage Alessandro has built around you. Marco can arrange for you to disappear, to start over somewhere safe with your child. And your father will be protected as part of the arrangement. The Bratva has no interest in hurting an innocent man. I closed my eyes, struggling to process everything I was hearing. If it was true, if Alessandro had been pulling the strings all along, then nothing I had believed about our relationship was real. The tenderness, the protection, the way he looked at me as if I actually mattered. It would all be nothing but an elaborate lie, carefully crafted to ensure his heir. But what if it wasn't true? What if Marco was simply trying to turn me against Alessandro out of spite or fear, and I was falling right into the hands of people who wanted to tear down everything we had built together? I need time to think. Time is something you don't have. Alessandro will be back soon, and once he realizes you know the truth, he won't let you out of his sight. The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. There's a car waiting at the service entrance behind the kitchen. The guards have been distracted by a minor incident at the front gate. You have maybe 10 minutes to decide. 10 minutes to throw away everything. 10 minutes to rescue yourself and your child from a life of beautiful captivity. The line went silent for a moment. Your father would want you to be free, Isabella. More than anything, he'd want you to have the choice he never could give you. The phone went dead, leaving me alone in Alessandro's study with the weight of an impossible decision. Through the windows, I could see activity near the front gate. Some kind of commotion that had pulled the guards' focus away from the main house. I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my bathroom trash, about the future Alessandro envisioned for us, marriage, children, a life of luxury built on violence and control, and about the gut-wrenching possibility that everything I believed was nothing more than a well-constructed lie designed to trap me. And then I considered the alternative. running off into the unknown with strangers who claim to offer freedom, but might be leading me into something even worse. The faint hum of a car engine drifted through the windows from somewhere behind the house. My ride to freedom or my path to destruction. I had to make a choice, and I had less than 10 minutes to decide whether to place my trust in the man I was falling in love with, or in the voice on the phone offering me truths I wasn't even sure I wanted to hear. The pregnancy test in the trash seemed to mock me with its certainty. 2 pink lines that had already altered the course of my life, no matter which choice I made. But as I sat there in Alessandro's chair, surrounded by the books he had bought for me and the life he had built around me, I realized that my decision had, in a way, already been made the moment I saw those 2 pink lines. I was carrying his child. Whatever else might be true or false, whatever games were being played around me, that baby was real, and that baby deserved better than to be born into a war between people who claimed to care about me. I walked to the kitchen, past the service entrance where a car waited in the shadows, and picked up the phone to call Alessandro. "Isabella, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to hear your voice, and I wanted to know, when I told him about the pregnancy, whether his reaction would expose a man who genuinely loved me, or one who had finally secured his perfect pawn." "I'll be home soon. Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm sure." I lied, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Whether that was actually true remained to be seen, but I was finished running from the truth, no matter what form it took. The war came to us at dawn, 3 days after the phone call that had nearly shattered my world. I had made the decision to trust Alessandro, to believe that, regardless of any manipulation that might exist in our relationship, his feelings for me were genuine. But doubt lingered like a poison in my veins, making me second-guess every touch, every tender word, every promise of protection. I still hadn't told him about the pregnancy. "Isabella, get away from the windows." Alessandro's voice cut through my morning reverie like a blade. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, fully dressed despite the early hour, his pale eyes sweeping the grounds beyond the glass with a predatory alertness. "What's wrong?" "Movement in the treeline. At least 20 men, probably more." He was already reaching for the gun he kept in the nightstand, his movements precise and deadly calm. "The Bratva is making their move." Through the bulletproof glass, I could see dark figures weaving through the trees that bordered Alessandro's estate. They moved with military-like precision, using the landscape for cover as they encircled the mansion like a tightening noose. "Where's my father?" "Safe. I moved him to a secondary location yesterday after our intelligence suggested this was coming." Alessandro checked his weapon with practiced ease, then tucked a second gun into his waistband. "But Isabella, there's something you need to know before this starts." The serious tone in his voice made my stomach clench with dread. "What?" "We found Marco." I turned away from the window, studying his face for clues about what this meant. "Is he alive?" "He's alive." "But what he told us?" Alessandro's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "The Bratva has been planning this for months, Isabella. The attack on your father, the surveillance, even Marco's betrayal. It was all orchestrated to cut us off from our allies and leave us vulnerable." "How?" "They knew Marco had gambling debts. They've been slowly buying his loyalty for over a year, feeding him just enough money to keep him hooked while he gathered intel on our operations." Alessandro moved to the window, his eyes tracking movement in the distance. "The night they grabbed your father, Marco gave them our security protocols. He thought he was just helping them snatch a random kidnapping victim for ransom. But then why did he help rescue Dad? Because by then he knew he was in too deep to back out. The Bratva doesn't just let people walk away, Isabella. Once you're compromised, you either serve them completely or you die." Alessandro's voice was weighted down with hard-earned experience. "Marco chose to serve them. The betrayal landed on me like a physical blow, even though I had known it was coming. Marco, who had protected me, who had seemed so genuinely loyal to Alessandro, had been playing a double game that could have gotten us all killed. But there's more." Alessandro continued, his pale eyes locking onto mine with startling intensity. "The phone call you got 3 days ago. That was Marco. He was trying to get you to run, because the Bratva promised to spare your life if he could deliver you to them willingly." My blood turned to ice. They wanted me alive. They want you alive because you're carrying my heir. Alessandro's gaze drifted down to my still flat stomach, and I saw an understanding in his eyes that made my knees buckle. Did you think I wouldn't notice, Isabella? The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the way you've been avoiding wine at dinner? He knew. Alessandro had known about the pregnancy, possibly longer than I had, and he had been waiting for me to say something. The knowledge that he had been protecting not just me, but our unborn child, caused something inside my chest to flutter. How long have you known? 2 weeks? Since you started nodding off during our evening conversations and couldn't stand the smell of coffee. Alessandro took a step closer, his hand gently cupping my face. I've been waiting for you to trust me enough to share the news. I was worried you'd think I did it on purpose as some kind of trap. His thumb traced across my cheekbone, and I saw something raw and vulnerable flicker in his expression. I've been hoping for this since the first night we were together. You carrying my child isn't a trap. It's a gift I never thought I deserved. Before I could respond, the crack of gunfire erupted from somewhere on the grounds. Alessandro instantly shoved me away from the window, his protective instincts taking over. Instead, he directed me towards the panic room. He guided me to a section of the wall that appeared identical to the rest, seamlessly integrated, but it cleverly concealed a hidden door. You'll be safe in there until this whole thing blows over, he stated, his voice firm. I'm not hiding while you go out there and fight a war, I retorted, my voice laced with defiance. You're carrying my child, Isabella. That changes everything. Alessandro countered, his tone brooking no argument. His voice was like steel wrapped in the smoothest silk, unyielding and yet refined. I won't risk both of you for the sake of your pride, he added, his eyes locking onto mine. More gunfire erupted, this time significantly closer, accompanied by shouts in multiple languages that I couldn't quite decipher. Through the windows, I could see the muzzle flashes of the guns lighting up the pre-dawn darkness like some kind of deadly, macabre fireworks display. Alessandro, there's something else I need to tell you, I said, grabbing his arm as he began to turn away. The phone call from Marco. He said my father's original debt was only $50,000, and that you inflated it to manipulate me. Alessandro froze, his pale eyes becoming incredibly still as he searched my face, trying to gauge my reaction and my beliefs. And you believed him? He asked, his voice dangerously low. I don't know what to believe anymore, I confessed, my voice filled with uncertainty and confusion. Then believe this, he stated, his tone brooking no argument. Alessandro pulled out his phone, scrolling through various files until he found what he was looking for. Your father's gambling debts, documented by 3 different organizations over a period of 2 years. The total comes to just over $2. 3 million. The sheer numbers on the screen made my head spin. Detailed records of bets placed, money borrowed, and interest compounded at rates that would have made even the most unscrupulous legitimate lenders recoil in horror. It wasn't just the $50,000 that Marco had claimed. It was a systematic destruction, a calculated dismantling of any hope my father might have had for financial redemption. Marco lied to you, Isabella? Alessandro said, his voice hard. The Bratva coached him on exactly what to say to make you doubt me, to make you vulnerable to their promises of rescue. Alessandro tucked his phone away, his expression grim and resolute. They needed you to come willingly, because taking you by force would have started a war they weren't quite ready to fight. But they're fighting it now because their subtle approach failed. You chose to trust me instead of running with them. Alessandro's smile was as sharp and dangerous as a finely honed blade. Now they have to try to take by force what they couldn't acquire through deception. An explosion rocked the mansion, sending picture frames tumbling from the walls and rattling the thick, bulletproof windows. Alessandro immediately wrapped his arms around me, instinctively shielding me from any falling debris. The panic room, Isabella, please. But as he spoke, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alessandro glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened considerably. It's them. They want to negotiate, he said, his voice grim. He answered the call on speakerphone, his voice deadly calm. You have something to say, Dimitri? Alejandro Gambino. The voice on the other end replied. It was smooth and cultured, with the faint accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. I believe we have something to discuss. I don't negotiate with people who attack my home, Alejandro replied icily. Not even to save the life of your unborn child. The mention of my unborn child sent a shiver of ice through my veins. We know Isabella is pregnant, Alejandro. We know that child represents the future of your entire organization, Dimitri stated, his voice laced with menace. Get to the point, Alejandro snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. The point is simple. You have something we want and we have something you want. Your father-in-law is safe, for now. But that could change very quickly if you don't listen to reason, Dimitri said smoothly. My father. Despite Alejandro's assurances, the Bratva had somehow gotten to him. I saw the exact moment Alejandro realized the same thing, saw the cold fury that transformed his features into something truly terrifying. What do you want? Alejandro demanded, his voice a low growl. Isabella, unharmed and willing. In exchange, Marcus Martinez lives, and we withdraw from your territory permanently. Dimitri's voice was patient and reasonable, as if he were discussing a simple business transaction. You have 1 hour to consider the offer. And if you refuse, then we kill the old man, storm your fortress, and take what we want anyway. The only difference is how many people die in the process. The line went dead, leaving us in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of gunfire and the frantic hammering of my own heart. They have my father, I whispered, my voice trembling. I know, Alejandro replied, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. I thought the facility was secure. I thought, it doesn't matter what you thought. The words came out harsher than I intended, fueled by fear and adrenaline and the terrible certainty that this was all my fault. They have him because of me, because I'm a liability you can't protect. Isabella. No. I stepped back, putting distance between us, even as another explosion shook the mansion. I won't let my father die because I was too selfish to make the hard choice. You're not going anywhere near them. It's not your decision to make, Alejandro stated firmly, his eyes blazing. I met his pale eyes with all the determination I could muster. I'm not your possession, Alessandro. I'm not something you own. You're carrying my child, and that child deserves to grow up with grandparents, not just the blood money from their grandfather's death. I moved towards the door, driven by a certainty that felt like destiny. I have to do this, I stated, my voice firm. Alejandro stepped into my path, blocking my way, his expression desperate. They'll kill you the moment they have what they want. Maybe, I conceded. But if I don't go, they'll definitely kill my father. I reached up, touching his face with hands that only trembled slightly. And then they'll come for us anyway. There has to be another way. There is, Alejandro insisted, his voice pleading. I smiled, hoping it looked more confident than I felt. You trust me to be strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Before Alessandro could stop me, I was running towards the sound of gunfire, towards the men who wanted to use me as a weapon against the father of my unborn child. Behind me, I heard Alessandro shouting my name, heard his footsteps as he gave chase. But I had a head start and desperation driving me forward. The war had come to our doorstep, and it was time to end it. 7 months later, I stood in the private wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, watching our daughter sleep peacefully in her bassinet beside the bed, where I'd nearly died bringing her into the world. Sophia Grace Gambino had arrived 3 weeks early, as if she couldn't wait to join the empire her parents had built from blood and betrayal. The war with the Bratva had ended that dawn when I'd walked into their temporary headquarters, not as their victim, but as their executioner. Dimitri had made the fatal mistake of assuming that pregnancy had made me weak, that carrying Alejandro's heir meant I could be used as leverage against him. He'd been wrong. The gun I'd taken from Alessandro's desk had felt surprisingly light in my hands as I'd put 3 bullets into Dimitri's chest. The man who'd orchestrated months of terror, who'd used my father as bait and Marco as a puppet, had died with surprise written all over his patrician features. Marco had been there, chained like a dog in the corner of the warehouse, his face a roadmap of bruises and regret. The Bratva had kept their word about keeping him alive, but they'd made sure he understood the price of betrayal. When I'd freed him after eliminating his captors, he'd wept like a child. "I'm sorry," he'd whispered over and over. "Isabella, I'm so sorry. They said they'd kill my daughter if I didn't cooperate. I never meant for it to go this far." I'd forgiven him, but Alessandro never would. Marco now lived in permanent exile, his gambling debts paid and his daughter's medical bills covered, but forbidden from ever returning to the city or contacting anyone from his old life. It was mercy of a sort, though I suspected Marco would have preferred death to the isolation Alessandro had imposed. My father had been found in the basement of the same warehouse, physically unharmed but mentally shattered by his ordeal. The addiction treatment Alessandro had arranged had helped with the gambling, but the trauma of being kidnapped and used as leverage against his daughter had left deeper scars. He was clean now, sober for the first time in years, working as head accountant for one of Alessandro's legitimate construction companies. The job gave him purpose and dignity while keeping him under protection that looked like ordinary employment. He'd walked me down the aisle 6 months ago, tears streaming down his face as he placed my hand in Alessandro's. Our wedding had been a masterpiece of controlled violence wrapped in silk and flowers. Representatives from every major crime family on the East Coast had attended, some as allies, others as carefully managed threats. The ceremony itself had taken place in a private chapel on Long Island, with security so extensive that the FBI had mistaken it for a summit meeting. I'd worn Alessandro's grandmother's dress, altered to accommodate my growing belly, and carried a bouquet of white roses that concealed a small pistol, a wedding gift from my new husband. The symbolism hadn't been lost on anyone present. Isabella Gambino was not a woman to be trifled with. "Mrs. Gambino?" The nurse's voice was soft, respectful, in the way that expensive private medical care demanded. "Your husband is here to see you." Alessandro entered the room like he owned it, which, considering the size of his donation to the hospital's pediatric wing, he essentially did. He looked older than his 28 years, the weight of leadership and recent fatherhood adding gravity to his pale eyes. But when he saw me holding our daughter, his expression softened into something that still took my breath away. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Tired. Sore. Happy," I replied. I shifted carefully, making room for him on the hospital bed. "She's perfect, isn't she?" Alessandro settled beside me, his large hands impossibly gentle as he took Sophia from my arms. The sight of this dangerous man cradling our tiny daughter never failed to move me. He spoke to her in Italian, words of love and protection that I was slowly learning to understand. "The business is thriving. Our expansion into legitimate enterprises is ahead of schedule, and the construction company your father manages just won a contract to build the new federal courthouse," Alessandro said, his smile sharp with irony. "The FBI will be working in a building constructed with Gambino money, and the other families are respectful. Word has spread about what you did to Dimitri. No one wants to test the woman who eliminated the Bratva's leadership while 6 months pregnant," Alessandro stated, his pride in my accomplishments unmistakable. "You've become something of a legend, Isabella, the queen who protects her king." It was an accurate description. In the months following the warehouse incident, I transformed from protected asset to active partner in Alessandro's empire. My architectural background had proven invaluable in designing buildings that served dual purposes. Legitimate businesses on the surface, with hidden spaces and escape routes that allowed for less legal activities when necessary. The daycare center I designed served real children from the community while also functioning as a meeting place for sensitive negotiations. The medical clinic provided genuine health care to underserved populations while serving as a neutral zone where disputes could be resolved without violence. I'd become the acceptable face of the Gambino family's charitable work, the respectable young mother who could sit on hospital boards and university committees while quietly ensuring that our interests were protected. "There's something else," Alessandro said, his voice taking on the tone that meant serious business. "The commission has extended an invitation. They want to meet you formally." "The commission?" the governing body that theoretically controlled organized crime activities across the country. Being invited to address them was recognition that I'd moved beyond being Alejandro's wife to being a power in my own right. Next month, when you've recovered from the delivery. It's largely ceremonial, but it establishes you as my official partner rather than just my spouse, Alejandro explained. He shifted Sophia to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. It also means that any attack on you will be considered an attack on me by every family in the organization. Protection through fear, protection through respect. There's a difference. Alejandro's pale eyes met mine with perfect understanding. You've earned this, Isabella. Not through me, but through your own choices and actions. It was true. The woman who'd hidden from rain in a stranger's car no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous, someone capable of pulling a trigger without hesitation when her family was threatened. But I was also someone who could design schools that served real children, who could manage charitable foundations that genuinely helped people, who could be a mother to the tiny girl sleeping in her father's arms. I have a proposal, I said, watching Alessandro's expression for his reaction. I want to establish a scholarship program, full rides to college for the children of our employees, legitimate and otherwise. Expensive ones. It's worth it. Education is the best investment we can make in the next generation. I reached out to stroke Sophia's downy hair. I want our daughter to grow up in a world where intelligence is valued as much as loyalty. And if some of those scholarship recipients decide they want nothing to do with our world, then they'll have the education and resources to build better lives for themselves. That's a win for everyone. I met Alejandro's gaze steadily. Not every problem can be solved with violence, Alejandro. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is give people choices. Alejandro considered this, his expression thoughtful. You want to reform the system from within, he stated. I want to build something that lasts longer than we do, something Sophia can be proud of whether she chooses to be part of it or not. And if she chooses differently, if she wants a normal life. I looked at our daughter, perfect and innocent in her father's arms, and felt the fierce protectiveness that had driven me to kill for her before she was even born. Then she'll have that choice, but she'll have it from a position of strength with resources and education, and the knowledge that she's loved unconditionally. I smiled, thinking of the trust funds Alejandro had already established, the legitimate businesses that would provide clean money for whatever future Sophia chose. We're not just building a criminal empire, Alessandro. We're building a legacy. Sophia stirred in her father's arms, her tiny fist closing around his finger with the instinctive grip of a child claiming her birthright. When she opened her eyes, they were the same pale blue as Alessandro's, but somehow warmer, full of possibility rather than calculation. She's going to be formidable, Alejandro murmured, wonder in his voice. She's going to be free, I corrected. Free to choose her own path, her own values, her own definition of power. Through the hospital window, the city spread out before us like a chessboard, full of territories to be claimed and alliances to be forged. It was Isabella Gambino now, wife to a king and mother to a princess, architect of an empire that served both darkness and light. The frightened girl who'd worked double shifts to pay her father's debts had died in that warehouse 7 months ago, reborn as someone who understood that true power came not from fear, but from the ability to protect what mattered most. Our daughter would inherit wealth and influence beyond measure. But more importantly, she would inherit the knowledge that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it meant pulling a trigger to protect your family. Sometimes it meant building schools to educate other people's children. And sometimes it meant choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over the cynicism that could so easily consume everything good in the world. Alejandro leaned over to kiss my forehead, careful not to disturb the baby between us. I love you, Isabella Martinez Gambino, he whispered. I love you too, I whispered back, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility, full of people who would never know how their fates were shaped by decisions made in hospital rooms and boardrooms, in warehouses and wedding chapels. But that was tomorrow's concern. Today, we were just a family, dangerous and devoted in equal measure, building something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy us. The empire would endure, but more importantly, so would we.